In this episode, I'm going to talk about housing affordability in Australia. My name is Adam Panisi. I do these videos to help you guys out and buy your own investment properties. And I'm going to highlight some housing affordability issues that we have in Australia at the moment. You can clearly see it on this graph. This is all of Australia wide. We have the lowest affordability index on record. You're probably not surprised by that. We are led by Melbourne and Sydney predominantly, with 75% of Australia's net worth in property being in those areas. So you've just got to see the growth that Melbourne and Sydney have had and how unaffordable most of those areas are for the average person. But I'm going to take you through some really affordable areas and pockets and show you how you can get into the property market in these areas. And I think that these particular places are going to have some substantial capital growth moving forward. Sydney and Melbourne may be a little bit more subdued because of this affordability ratio. So let's kick off by showing you each individual area. So the affordability index per capital or per area, and I'll relate it back to capital cities. You've got New South Wales being absolutely the lowest, followed shortly by Victoria. Many of you might be shocked to see Victoria and Tasmania are actually looking like they're about the same level in terms of affordability. You got to remember, with property and values, the capacity to pay plays a massive role in property values themselves. So that's why Sydney and Melbourne values have shot through the roof, because there's high capacity to pay for people buying into those markets. Whereas when you take somewhere like Tasmania, for example, the wages, the income is a lot lower, generally speaking. So you're going to have lower property values, and that ratio of affordability is going to be the same, which it looks like it is at the moment. And Tasmania's had a massive property boom over the last 10 years. Values have jumped substantially there, but especially obviously the last 5, even more so. So I'm not surprised that Tasmania's affordability is similar to Victoria. Then you can see Queensland, South Australia, Western Australia, all leading the pack with affordability. And I'll take you through some of these charts in a bit more detail for each of those areas. So have a look at the mortgage repayments as a share of income. You can see we're pretty much at the same level as we were back in 2007 and the same level we were back in about 1989. So you can see there's been a big cliff after that's happened, as in after we've had those big booms, we get this big cliff and then affordability starts to come back into the market. So the fact that I'm trying to make is that overall property in Australia is unaffordable. This is overall, but there are certain areas where it's still very affordable for people to buy in, and it's those areas which are booming at the moment. It's those affordable markets. Because interest rates have gone so high, we're seeing those affordable markets boom, whereas the ones that have peaked, that are getting to that unaffordable range, they're going to plateau, and they have already. So I like to use an affordability ratio index for each suburb. I do this myself, and I teach my students to do this as well. If the ratio gets above 13%, and that is median income versus the median price of property, if that is looking like it's below 13%, then generally that suburb doesn't experience too much capital growth. But if the affordability is above that, so in other words, let's say it's 20% affordability, that means the income ratio is 1/5 of what the value of the property is, and that is household income. So if you've got a household income, let's say $100,000 household income, and you've got a house value of $500,000, well, that is a 20% ratio there. So you've got 1/5 of the income. So this as a ratio, and this is calculated differently by PropTrack to how I assess affordability per suburb. But you can see we are tracking at a pretty high level across the country. So let's break it down into each state. And this is going to be predominantly led by each capital city, keep in mind. So New South Wales affordability index, it's probably no surprise to you, it's the lowest that it's been on record. So declining affordability. Once interest rates start to reduce, then this affordability will obviously go up. That doesn't necessarily mean that property values will decline for affordability to go up. So I'll just repeat that just to wrap your head around it. So with interest rates going down, it means affordability is better, but it doesn't mean that property values will have to drop for affordability to get better. You've also got to keep in mind as well, inflation affects affordability. So as your wage increases by whatever that increase is, 3%, 5%, per year. Hopefully it's that high. When your wage increases and when our average wage in Australia increases, and that affordability index goes up as well. So you've got to drill it down to individual suburbs and what that median household income looks like. So you can see the affordability index is low at the top. And then you got mortgage repayments as a share of income. And again, probably no surprise, it's nearly as high as what it was back in 89, 90, before we had that recession that we had to have. So a few indicators pointing to the same path with looking back in history. So that's mortgage repayments as a share of income. And I'm going to take you through a few of the other states. So I'm going to do New South Wales and then the few affordable states. So South Australia first, the more affordable one. The affordability index doesn't look really flash in this as well, even though South Australia is cheap buying when compared to the other eastern cities, Sydney and Melbourne. For example, and even Brisbane, South Australia is a lot cheaper than those areas, but the affordability index is sort of peaking. So I have seen in a lot of different suburbs in South Australia, they are looking like they're approaching their peak or they're already at their peak. So buying in South Australia, you've got to be a bit more selective, I think, about where you buy, because a lot of areas have already had that boom. But I still think that there's some really good buying in some suburbs that haven't boomed as much, and I think we'll get that ripple effect. But you can see top graph, affordability index is pretty low. And then the other one, mortgage repayments as a share of income, is pretty high for South Australia. Queensland, ours is similar, which I'm a bit surprised by this, saying that it's about the same level as what it was in 2007, 2008, because I still think Brisbane and Queensland is very affordable across the board. But you are looking at local buyers in that. And same with Perth, same with South Australia, Adelaide. You're looking at the local buyers, you're looking at the median price, or the median income for that area, and you're not necessarily factoring in interstate buyers, because interstate buyers have a lot more money, especially if they're coming from Sydney and Melbourne into these areas. And this is what has been happening, and this is what's driven prices in a lot of different areas. But again, affordability still plays a big role. So you see the bottom graph, the index again is similar to 07, 08. So really all it can mean is either property prices are going to fall, which in real value in a lot of areas they are falling. In real value, I mean they're not moving, they're staying stagnant, which means that inflation is running at whatever it is, 5% at the moment. Inflation's running at 5%, so your property needs to grow by 5% per year for it to technically be zero. Whereas if it doesn't do anything, so if the property value stays at say 500,000 and it's the same value next year, and you've got inflation running at 5%, well, technically that property has dropped by 5% in value. That's what I mean by real values. So this is Queensland, and Western Australia is very affordable. This is the home run with affordability, and Western Australia is getting a lot of interstate investment there as well from mum and dad buyers or interstate investors, whatever that looks like, and whether you're part of this Perth housing boom. But you can see that Perth housing market is extremely affordable when you compare it to the eastern cities, and even South Australia. It is a lot more affordable, but I do think Perth will have time to shine, which will be now, and then what could happen after then, who knows. It might go through a long period of stagnation. In other words, values don't grow or they go backwards, and it is a very small market as well. So I think of Perth as more like a regional market rather than a capital city, despite the fact that it does have a lot of people. But I still think there's some really good gains to be made in a lot of Perth suburbs. However, there are a lot of suburbs that have boomed in Perth over the last few years as well, where I think that it's really not good buying. You can see the affordability in Western Australia is like pretty good when you compare it to previous years, especially when you look at like 07, 08, you saw every other place's affordability, Eastern Coast be really high in this period, really low in this period rather, so no affordability in 07, and then currently they're all sitting at the same. So if you just backtrack, you have a look at Queensland, we're nearly the same as 07, South Australia nearly the same as 07, and then New South Wales even less than 07, which is obviously the last boom. And when you look then at Western Australia, we're nowhere near there. So we've got a long way to go. In other words, property values could go up substantially before that affordability looks like it's the same as '07. So, and then you have a look at household income as a share of mortgage repayments, as a share of household income, sorry. And again, it's nowhere near as high as what the 2007, 2008 peaks are, and also, back in the 90s. So there's a really good indicator to show that the Perth market still has a lot of steam potentially to run according to this affordability index. So it is at a point where it's very affordable for people buying into Perth. And if you take that with interstate buyers, then interstate buyers with no affordability in Sydney and Melbourne, and even Brisbane to an extent, if they look over in Perth, it's very affordable, and that's why a lot of interstate people are buying over there at the moment. But just be careful buying in Perth. I think there's a lot of areas that have gone through their boom cycle and are at the peak of that, and I think are going to hit that stagnation. In other words, no growth for some time, whereas I think there's some really excellent suburbs in Perth that will have a really good run for the next 6 to 12 months, and maybe even beyond that. Thanks for listening. Hope you've got a lot of value out of this video, and if you have any questions, please let us know in the comments. Have a good one.